Thank you, everybody, for your patience with us. I'd now like to welcome to the stage Congressman Adrian Smith with Stephanie Lester of Gap Inc. I hope everyone enjoyed your lunch. Thank you so much for joining us here today and sticking with us for the closing session of the 2024 Washington International Trade Conference. We're delighted to welcome our final speaker on stage. He's a good friend of all of us in the trade community, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Trade Subcommittee, Congressman Adrian Smith of Nebraska's 3rd Congressional District, which I'm told is about 65,000 square miles. It's one of the largest non-at-large districts in the country, bigger than 26 states, if my math is correct. Thank you so much, Adrian, for joining us, and Stephanie, who's the Vice President of WITC's Board of Directors. Thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here with you, Chairman Smith. A little bit more about you, some fun facts. It's not only large geographically, but your district is the #1 agriculture producing district by market value, right?
Right.
So you've got a lot of
other things too.
In agriculture. Well, you're a big Nebraska volleyball fan.
That's right. That's big in Nebraska.
I hear. Folks may remember last year the Nebraska women's volleyball team set a world record, pulling 92,000 fans to a game, which that would make Taylor Swift proud.
In the football stadium.
Yeah, in the football stadium. That's quite something. You're a co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional Agriculture Trade Caucus, and we all know trade is very important to farmers. So let's dig right in. And I'm going to start with the Constitution and the constitutional underpinnings of trade, with the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, giving Congress the authority to regulate tariffs and foreign commerce. But where is Congress going to go? What is the role of Congress? TPA expired in 2015, or it was last renewed in 2015, expired in 2021.
Generations ago.
Feels like generations ago. So what do you think the role of Congress should be in policymaking, understanding that constitutional underpinning?
Look, trade obviously requires the vote of Congress, but it also necessitates the leadership of the administration. And this is, I think, a great example of tag teaming that can take place to achieve a common goal. Obviously, the legislative branch, there can be gridlock and various things, and yet now would be such a great opportunity for the administration to stand up and be heard, for example, on biotech corn and in Mexico, for example. I guess they're going through the process here for enforcement, but I would like to see a stronger position from the administration because Congress did our work. Please remember that USMCA was a Trump priority under a Pelosi speakership. It got done. A great example, and I think can give us some opportunity moving forward.
Yeah. Well, on that, I think we've seen both the Trump and Biden administrations have claimed authority to negotiate agreements without TPA. We had with Trump the Japan Phase 1 agreement. We've got Biden pursuing IPEF and APEP, critical minerals. They've also imposed and maintained some significant tariffs under authorities delegated by Congress. These delegations date back to the 60s and the 70s. Do you think that they've gone too far? And how do we get that back and forth that you were talking about, co-creation?
Right. Well, recently, as you know, the critical mineral agreement that the Biden administration established, that you'll hear Democrats raise their concerns that the administration went too far on that. I think we should always expect an administration to go as far as they possibly can, perhaps they can get away with. But to ignore Congress is to also ignore opportunities to expand trade and to find trade that has enforcement along with it. IPEF Of course, it's been scaled back considerably. It's such a light touch approach. I don't think you'll find too many folks saying, well, the administration went too far, because there's just not a lot there. So, but enforcement, and I think this is a bipartisan dynamic, enforcement to any trade agreement is vital. That if there are discussions that take place around trade, that's fine. But unless it contains enforcement, it just won't be as strong. And at the same time, for my colleagues concerned, and there are many, concerned about labor and environment on both sides of the aisle, that level playing field that we seek, the best way to achieve that is through a trade agreement and having these discussions, ironing out the differences, and the best way to get other countries to elevate their labor and environment policies to be closer to us is to say, hey, here's how we can go about that after a good, thorough conversation, and then ultimately winding its way through a process such as a trade agreement.
Yeah, you mentioned there isn't much there with IPEF. Is there any effort to maybe change that dynamic to get some more there?
Well, there is an effort. I sense that the workforce shortages across our economy have recently impacted USTR as well. So the fact is, we just don't see the priority from the administration, which is unfortunate, because I did have some hope that there would be some, a stronger posture of really leaning into various trade policies, that we know these problems exist. And it's not just Mexico and biotech corn, for example. That one happens to be important to my district. And I will say that if we push that aside or do not aggressively defend ourselves on that, I think we should expect other countries on many fronts to really undermine what has previously been agreed upon. And when you look at agriculture and USMCA, the main difference between NAFTA and USMCA is biotechnology. And here we are. And I think it could have and should have been resolved long before now. But let's not sit back and just watch to see what happens. We need to be aggressive, and hopefully the president will step up and say himself that what's happening is not right.
Yeah. I mentioned the tariffs that were imposed under President Trump and then maintained with Biden, and now we're in an election year, and heard suggestions of maybe 60% tariffs on China in addition, and 10% across the board, tariff increase. Do you think Congress should rethink these authorities that they've delegated to the administration? Look at 232s or 301s or the IEPA delegation. Do you think is there any appetite to revisit some of those? I think
it would be hard to revisit those right now, but it's no secret that I'm not a huge fan of tariffs. I will also say that with any good negotiation, you want all your tools available. Have every tool on the table, and that should they be used, it should be done in a nimble fashion. To send the message that we're serious about leveling this playing field. I think we definitely want to always keep in mind what is the net impact on consumers. After all, they're the ones that make up our economy. And I heard someone say one time that it's not government that creates jobs, it's not even employers who create jobs, it's customers who create jobs. Here we are.
As a brand, we're working for a brand. I can relate to that sentiment.
Yes.
Very much. I'm curious, trade policy feels very stuck and polarized. How are members of Congress just looking at trade policy as trade subcommittee chair? They're coming to you and talking to you. How do we talk about trade in our district? I imagine for you, having such an agricultural district, farmers, it's top of mind for them. Just curious, what are the kind of behind the scenes conversations that lawmakers are asking of you?
Sure. Well, colleagues, they generally come to me with a concern about the supply chain and maybe cost of inputs. So I hear a lot about that. Back home in the district, I will say that in terms of agriculture, President Trump enjoyed a lot of support, even amidst some of the retaliation that had taken place, because I think they sensed that there was a strong position coming from Washington and the White House at the time on leveling the playing field. And so leaning into those issues and trade writ large, I think really empowered folks to ultimately come together, finish up with USMCA, and provide a framework. I mean, USMCA, I think, at least best to my knowledge, is the most bipartisan trade agreement in modern history. And so that, I think, was an opportunity to kick off and a precursor to other opportunities around the world that has not been seized of late.
Yeah, that raises a good question, because you did see, while they both have imposed tariffs, you had Trump really take on USMCA and the Japan agreement. How would you compare the two administrations and their trade policies and their trade records?
Oh, well, we're still waiting to hear what the analysis is on some of the tariffs, which we should have heard before now, I would argue. But not even looking at the outcomes of, say, the 4 years of the Trump administration and so far the 3 years of Biden. But it's hard to say that trade in the last 3 years is even close to a priority. And as much hope as I had when our trade ambassador was introduced on a bipartisan basis before the Senate panel in the confirmation process. And so, and I don't know what all has led to such inactivity coming from the administration as it relates to trade, but it's glaring. And this all amidst supply chain crisis, inflation. If ever there's a time that we need to really lean into trade, it's right now, and has been this way for some time. And the line is, well, they fear they don't have the votes for a trade agreement. Well, I don't know of any trade agreement that started out with enough votes. It required a great amount of diligence, conversation, interactions, both branches, executive and legislative branch of the government. And that's the way it's supposed to be. Now, trade is not easy. It's very difficult. It's very complex. It gets in the weeds really quickly. But to just ignore it will not cause the problems to go away. Engagement is what is necessary. And, domestic manufacturers, for example, they are begging for stronger supply chains and various other dynamics that we need to pay attention to. And we're just not seeing it, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah. Hear you on the inaction. There are, I think, I'm an optimist, and I would like to, I'm excited at the prospect of Ways and Means kind of digging in on trade, hopefully in the near term, and I think this is what everybody wants to hear about, the Ways and Means trade agenda. So let's go there. And there's some pending legislation that is the role of Congress to renew things like the generalized system of preferences, which I personally think is a dereliction of duty that it's been expired for as long as it has. Right. But also the miscellaneous tariff bill, AGOA, Haiti, all these things are coming up for renewal in our legislative programs. What do you expect to come up in committee in the coming weeks and months? Sure,
but I think you can look for legislation coming up on GSP and MTB. I've been really interacting with colleagues, and some good dialogue there that I think can help us arrive at some text to move some things forward. I think overall, we just had a hearing last week, Trade Subcommittee, about the WTO heading into their next ministerial. Very bipartisan in our concerns, whether it's the TRIPS waiver and what that means moving forward. But 3 years with more than 3 years now with GSP and MTB lapsed, that obviously has folks concerned when they're thinking about AGOA coming up next year for renewal. And that sends signals. This 3-year lapse sends signals in other directions that we should be concerned about. So now I think we're making good progress and able to bring folks together on this. It's unfortunate though that it has taken so long.
Do you expect that work to be bipartisan?
I do believe the work will be bipartisan, and domestic manufacturing, for example, that's begging for these provisions. It's bipartisan. It is not. These companies across America aren't just in Republican districts, for example, or just Democratic districts. It's all very bipartisan, and I think the fact that USMCA was so bipartisan has really elevated the interest of both sides of the aisle, and so let's use that to moving forward to move the ball down the field.
There's also a lot of attention on China among policymakers, and the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, they've been quite vocal and active, including making recommendations on China trade issues, raising questions about PNTR, policies like de minimis, and these are squarely within the jurisdiction of the Ways and Means Committee. So how do you think the committee is going to deal with some of these things that the China committee has raised in their recommendations?
Yeah, well, with any select committee creation, that can sometimes concern the standing committees and the jurisdiction associated. But I think overall, though, there's been good conversation between the Select Committee on China, the Ways and Means Committee, other committees as well. And I appreciate their diligence. I think that the bipartisan nature and priority of being bipartisan has been especially helpful. I will also say, looking back to last spring, when the president of Taiwan came to California to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, that was a bipartisan presence for us to welcome the president of Taiwan, and I think that helped us get some other things done moving forward from there. Now, when it comes to supply chains and what China happens to be doing right now, that concerns me a lot. That perhaps there were some unintended consequences, but our response, we need to be careful of unintended consequences as well. That we might take some action and not even come close to achieving what was intended. In fact, off to the side, there might be even worse consequences. So we have to be careful of that. The economy, the way it moves, isn't always easy to predict, and we have to, I think, be diligent in how we fashion our policy. Again, keeping consumers in mind, but to also realize that our supply chain resiliency can take form in different ways, and GSP, MTB, for example, it's not just about China, and it's about other friendly countries who share many of our values, perhaps not 100% aligned. We need to be mindful of that as well, but to develop, as the terms go, friendshoring and nearshoring, fantastic opportunities, I think, along the way, whether it's Central America, South America, others. I don't want to get too geographically specific, but a fact of the matter is, I think there are options in the world that exist in a very vibrant way that, again, leaning into trade policy could deliver better results than what we've seen. That I think at the beginning, a while back, I would have characterized the posture on trade coming from the White House as just treading water, but I don't even think it's that good these days. And that inactivity, that inaction from the administration, that many Democrats tell me off to the side that they're concerned about as well, that we are losing opportunities, and that's with our own interests in mind, and as well as the broader geopolitical interests as well.
Losing opportunities takes me back to farmers, and they are so in touch with trade and so reliant on trade. Are they asking you to find new ways to open market access? And how do we get there in a bipartisan way? It just feels very stuck.
Right now, that calling it stuck, that is correct. I think, U.S. agriculture, they're very engaged on trade. They understand, whether it's TPA, whether it's other, promotion of our products abroad. I wish that more of the American people could understand, say, the Foreign Ag Service and what exists on our behalf in embassies around the world. And it's very impressive, and so we want to keep them on task and to keep advocating for our products around the world. So they're I think, good examples of this, and we don't want to forget about that. In fact, I was in Japan a few years back, and hearing our Foreign Ag Service officer there talk about U.S. beef, and I am a little partial, but an expert on the ground in a country like Japan, where it is absolutely vital. These are things that take place that we should really celebrate, and I think agriculture is very engaged on this, to your question, but we can't take anything for granted. And other countries, they would love to take the market share that we might take for granted from time to time. Now, I happen to think that our beef tastes better than perhaps some other type of beef from other countries. And fortunately, I think consumers around the world share this view. But if our products are so much more expensive, consumers, whether it's here, whether it's there, they're ultimately in charge. And they're going to be price sensitive as well.
I imagine you have a strong opinion, corn-fed or grass-fed?
There's no question.
Corn-fed, okay.
Japan likes to tell me that they like to buy our corn even to feed their beef. So the fact of the matter is, Japan and the U.S. are fierce competitors in many ways, healthy competitors, I will say. And when it comes to beef, they've got their products, we've got our products, and both valuable in different ways. And that back and forth has been very healthy, and has given more opportunity for their products, for our products, and it really elevates the entire situation. And so I don't hear from beef producers in my district saying, well, shut out the Japanese Kobe or Wagyu beef. There's room in the world for both of our products. And I think that's just one example of how healthy competition ultimately helps consumers.
Yeah. I mentioned at the beginning, you're co-chair of the Congressional Agriculture Trade Caucus. You've got a strong cast of co-chairs with Dusty Johnson and Jimmy Panetta and Jim Costa. What do you hope to achieve with that caucus?
Well, we just launched that a couple of weeks ago, and I appreciate, that it's both Ways and Means and Ag Committee and others. That there's such keen interest in this that ag, we've got a great story to tell on trade, and having this ag trade caucus helps elevate that exposure to what has happened previously. Let's always remember how we've gotten to the place where we are, and how we can leverage our position now for greater opportunities moving forward. So that's what this is about. And to just, bring more information to colleagues and ultimately folks who are interested across America and around the world that, agriculture, it doesn't happen by accident that we have record yields amidst a drought. And that's not, just the research that takes place. So that isn't as valuable unless producers across Ag America are willing to engage new ideas, new ways of doing things. And if we're not careful, and we don't have expanding markets overseas, we just have our producers become victims of their own success in terms of efficient production. And I think it is an incredible opportunity that we can help feed the world. And I think we should take this very seriously, and that when you look at the developments there is absolutely so much to celebrate and highlight.
Great. Well, I don't want to monopolize all the questions. I imagine that the audience has some burning questions. So if, Doug, I'm looking right at you, so.
Well, thanks. Congressman Smith, I just wonder if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on the prospects for legislation. You sounded fairly optimistic of stuff moving. I mean, do you see a package of trade legislation getting through the House and the Senate all the way to the president's desk? And what would you think would be in that? Would it include GSP, miscellaneous tariff bill? I don't know what else, TAA or AGOA renewal? Just if you could be a little more.
Yeah, I think the hearing from colleagues and so forth, that GSP has a lot of momentum, but MTB certainly is still important as well. So hard to say exactly, even with legislation to be introduced, what that final product looks like. But there's bipartisan interest here, and especially the signals that we can send, say GSP, MTB, on to teeing up hopefully a GOA renewal before it expires, so that we can prevent any lapsed time that would otherwise take place.
Thanks. I had a question on de minimis, which Stephanie mentioned. There are a lot of proposals swirling around on that to reduce the de minimis level, or even eliminate de minimis entirely, exclude certain countries for geopolitical reasons, exclude certain products, to deal with particular protected industries, to ensure CBP gets sufficient information. What are your thoughts on that, and what you're hearing from members, how you navigate that while maintaining, the underlying policy behind having a de minimis provision?
Right. I think a common thread with those who express concern to me, and for good reason, is enforcement. So, just hypothetically, if de minimis were gotten rid of and there were no enforcement, would anything change? And then, the tighter that might be, the more difficult enforcement can become. Now, keep in mind that, various countries, just take, with Canada, there's such a glaring difference between our de minimis and their de minimis because they are so protectionist in their approach. Now, ultimately, I think that hurts their own consumers. But as we move forward, looking at de minimis the way it is now, and there's a variety of opinions there. And my first message is, okay, how can we accomplish whatever someone is setting out to accomplish? And we have to be, I think, very thoughtful in this approach, because I think we've arrived at a scenario, commercially looking, just anecdotally, that some of these things were not intended with increasing de minimis the way it was, or the way it has been. And so moving forward, let's have as much information on the table as possible, so that we can sort through what is it that folks really want to achieve, and how and what is the best way to go about achieving that. So we have to be diligent and careful there.
Congressman, good to see you again. I have a question on enforcement. You mentioned that's a priority, and of course it is for all private sectors. Mexican private sector is not the exception. But as you know, the record of the USMCA on enforcement, putting aside labor, is not pretty good. So my question is if we can expect that there's a window of opportunity to change this trend once the elections are over. You have your election, we have ours this year. And we will very soon get, after the elections, into the review clause. The implementing bill indicates that October 25, that process will start. So do you see that there's a window of opportunity building on the bipartisanship of the USMCA to work on getting to the review clause with a better record on enforcement? I don't know, maybe the recently created caucus on ACT could take the lead on that, but is there something that could be done there?
The short answer, yes. I think there's a window of opportunity. You know, obviously, with our presidential election coming up, that provides limited opportunity, I think, for policy yet this year. But I think soon after the election, there's reasons, you know, that you mentioned as well, the point to, hey, let's get this worked out, you know, so that both sides can move forward in a way where it's understandable and that various stakeholders see on the horizon a more level playing field.
Congressman, my name is Kate Kalukowicz. I'm with McClarty Associates. Thank you so much for taking the time. In particular, I really liked what you said about the consumer and the customer really driving the way we think about trade. And perhaps one of the most direct way for companies in America, particularly small and medium-sized companies, to reach new customers is through the internet. And we haven't spoken much about digital trade. But I'm very interested in your perspective on this because, of course, you talked about USTR and the administration treading water, but in many ways in digital, we're actually seeing the backstroke. Because, of course, USMCA had some really novel commitments when it came to digital trade and e-commerce, and regrettably, we're seeing the administration moving away from some of those long-held positions with free flow of data and free competition for U.S. companies overseas. So I'd be very interested in your perspective of what the subcommittee, or even more broadly, the Ways and Means Committee might do to ensure that we're still promoting high standards in this space.
Right. Well, this is bipartisan. Darren LaHood and Susan Delbene, great examples of, you know, expressed concern among colleagues, and that's just two of many who are really diligently working on the digital front. The fact that the administration stepped away, whether it was IPEF or, you know, I think we're all nervous what might be said, you know, in the next ministerial with the WTO. We just don't sense a priority from the administration that, hey, here we are on the digital front, that we don't want to give that away. And, you know, in our national interest, but consumer interests around the world. And realizing that on the digital front, it's not even, you know, an entity replacing in the economy something else, but it is, you know, the multiplier effect can be actually a little bit daunting at times, but what a great opportunity, again, I would say, for the administration to step up and say, here's what we need. Perhaps because of Congress and the bipartisan concerns in the legislative branch. But I'm very concerned that the administration, even with IPEF having no enforcement to it, that they backed off of anything digital along that route.
Hi, thank you for the time. I was wondering what the status is in regards to the critical minerals agreement between the U.S. and the EU, and what role Congress and the Ways and Means Committee is playing there, and what we expect in the next few months or, yeah.
Well, I don't think it's clear, it's certainly not clear enough yet for us to really be able to formulate a way forward. Now, you know, critical minerals, the broader issue is getting a lot of conversation among colleagues, perhaps with the environmental point of view from some, economically speaking, and you know, my own district has a play for critical minerals. I think that's a great opportunity for us in Middle America, but also, you know, I think there's lacking clarity moving forward in terms of manufacturing, whether it's EVs totally, or the hybrid approach, that's more on the manufacturing side, but, the intensity of need for critical minerals, I think, will be there. But working out those details remains. But I think, again, it's a great example that we need to have the conversations moving forward that are not yet being had, at least that we've been informed of. So whether it's Europe, whether it's elsewhere, we need to engage.
Hi, Marilee, International Trade Today. I wanted to come back to de minimis. You were talking about what if we change de minimis and it's not, and enforcement doesn't change. What does that mean? So I wanted to ask you, of course, CBP is the one that has to enforce. What are they telling you, or their staff telling you, about what could be administrable? Like, are some of these ideas of like cutting out textiles or cutting out China specifically, are they saying, we don't think that would be effective and this is what we think would be more effective?
I think overall there's concern about resources and how impactful, what they actually need moving forward. Now, I couldn't give you the exact specifics of what they actually want, but we want them to be able to do their job, and they've got a task. It's not easy with mere volume, and so that agility moving forward, I think, is important, so that they feel that they've got the opportunity and the ability to enforce without perhaps some distractions or some rigidity that may not ultimately be as effective at accomplishing the objective as well.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time. I think you insist very rightly on the importance of enforcement for the value of a trade agreement. But in the WTO, actually, it's the U.S. administrations who killed the enforcement mechanism, although...
Sorry, the U.S., say again?
Who killed the enforcement mechanism, the dispute settlement process, although the country, quote unquote, won 85% of the panels they asked for. So I would like your thoughts about that.
The thoughts about the enforcement generally?
The fact that the U.S. essentially got rid of the enforcement mechanism in the WTO.
Well, there's concern about WTO and the overall framework of how they operate, that basically one country can effectively have veto power over anything. So my colleagues, I hear from my colleagues a lot in terms of how the WTO is funded and how they operate, but heading into various big decisions, I grow concerned that the way it's structured, that other countries might have that veto authority. Well, are we utilizing our role the way we can and should as well? And TRIPS and so forth has given me concern that we're not even as ambiguous as some of these challenges are, that when we have the opportunity, because of the way they're structured, that we're not even taking advantage of those opportunities. That concerns me, and especially concerns my colleagues as well, who raise various concerns, and part of those were raised in the hearing last week as well.
We're just going to take one more question over there, and then we'll wrap up.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. I'm Khushbu from the South China Morning Post. My question is about, we were talking about China and trade, and then we have this technology competition going on. I just wanted to get your thought on, right now the Biden administration is looking for areas to cooperate with China. Do you think agriculture is one area that can actually become the foundation of kind of rebuilding the relationship? Or is there a national security concern in that area as well? Because recently we had a senator saying that importing garlic is a national security concern. So I just wanted to get your thought on that. Thank you.
Well, there will be a number of different characterizations, with various interests in mind. I think by default, the fact that our ag sector is so productive and efficient, and the fact that everyone needs to eat around the world, and that 96% of the world's population lives outside our country, it's a natural fit that we are viewed as a leader in how important agriculture is to, like I said, feeding the world. So, over time, there's the numbers point to the fact we've given other countries more access to our markets than they've given us to theirs. That's a problem. And that just doesn't get swept aside when there aren't the engagements and the conversations that need to take place. So agriculture is front and center, make no mistake. And that's why other countries retaliate on agriculture, because they know how important it is to our country. And I will say that's even better reason that President Biden should address the Mexico corn issue just head on. And it can be done in a very diplomatic fashion. And so, 435 members of the House, another 100 senators, all free agents, so to speak, as it relates to representing their constituency and the various perspectives that they share. But that's the beauty of our system, too, is it's broad-based. And let's utilize that in those various conversations. But that's what makes trade more difficult. That doesn't mean we should just walk away from doing what we need to do to really lean in. And like I said, it's an incredible opportunity to have the resources to help feed the world, without even mentioning the benefits of what a fed world can deliver. And that might be for several more conferences moving forward. But appreciate the opportunity. Glad you're here. Glad you're engaged and leaning into such important issues. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you one last question, because we're going to give everybody a little bit of homework, because this is the trade policy, a microcosm of the trade policy ecosystem here in DC. We talk about trade being stuck, but we are the policymakers, lobbyists, embassies. What would you like all of us to do to help get to a more constructive place on trade?
Sure. Well, trade as an issue might be stuck right now, but it won't stay stuck all by itself. I mean, the consumers domestically and beyond, they are going to have some things to say about various things, and whether it's what they have to pay at the grocery store or elsewhere. But to really share the information, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, though, about, where were we X amount of time ago compared to where we are now, and where we can go moving forward. And, like I said, it's a complex issue, and it over time, it has evolved a little bit that, can tilt the field against us domestically, but I also see that as an opportunity to elevate the discussion. I will tell you that even in a district like mine, before USMCA, say early Trump term, that trade was getting a bad name. Now I would say it was inaccurately that way, but the Trump administration leaning into the trade issue writ large elevated the discussions in coffee shops across my district, and I think across America. And whether it was Democrats opposed to tariffs at the time because they were Trump's tariffs or what have you, But the discussion was elevated in terms of what's happening, where have we been, where are we going with this? I think that's healthy, and we should utilize that moving forward to channel the discussion and be productive about it, and ultimately getting trade unstuck, but also in a productive fashion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Very grateful to you. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks.
That is it, everybody. We are wrapping this up. Big thanks again to our sponsors, Amazon, the National Pork Producers Council, Trade Data Monitor, UPS, Business Roundtable, American Apparel and Footwear Association, the Aluminum Association, the Express Association of America, the National Retail Federation, and Trade Center Management Associates are hosts in this lovely venue at the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center. Watch your inboxes. We're going to be announcing a pop-up briefing from Abu Dhabi and MC13 in a couple weeks. So I guess it's not really a pop-up briefing. It's sort of a pre-planned pop-up briefing. And on March 5th, we'll be back here at the Reagan Building for our Congressional Trade Councils event. That'll be March 5th. We hope to see you all in person, but we will also be available online for that as well. Thank you all for joining us. Everyone take care. The sun is back out in D.C. Thank you for being here, and be safe.